Hello, and welcome to UK Paranormal Files. The focus of this episode is the 2009 Silbury Hill alien encounter. Silbury Hill is a prehistoric chalk mound in the county of Wiltshire, England, about 24 miles from the world-famous Stonehenge site. It is a remarkable location in its own right, and stands at 129 feet or 39 metres tall, and has a diameter of 549 feet or 167 metres. It is the tallest prehistoric man-made mound in Europe. It has been subjected to numerous excavations over the years, and the best guess is that the initial construction began around 2400 BC, with the ring of the hill expanded on at least two subsequent occasions. Archaeologists have estimated a total of 18 million man-hours have been devoted to raising and expanding the mound, which is the equivalent of 500 people working for 15 years. In the 1968-70 study, Professor Richard J.C. Atkinson was very productive and revealed most of what is currently known about the site, including that the very initial construction likely started in August of that year, as evidenced by the remains of winged ants at key locations. Atkinson also argued that the hill was initially constructed as a series of steps, with each tier being filled in with packed chalk and then smoothed off or weathered into a slope. The purpose of its construction is a mystery. Early assumptions were that it was intended as a Neolithic burial mound, but since some of the earliest excavations below its surface, it has become clear that there is no evidence to support this. What is clear is that over its vast history, settlements have come and gone in the nearby vicinity. The current nearest is the village of Avebury, which is curiously home to its own Neolithic henge, though much less well known than its more famous counterpart 24 miles up the road. All of this information is provided by way of setting the scene for a potentially paranormal encounter which took place close to this hill in 2009 and has subsequently lent its name to the encounter. The case has been publicised, but not so widely that it is well known to too many people, and I did not find too many pages on some of the usual websites that I encounter when researching episodes for this channel. Most of the reference work in this episode was learned from the websites of two individuals who were involved in the subsequent investigation. I will link to those sites in the description and want to give them credit as the source for much of what we're about to cover. Those investigators being Colin Andrews and Andrew Russell. Without their diligent investigative work and having already established trust prior to the incident with the officer at the centre of this case, this story would likely never have been told. Anyway, on to the incident. On the 6th of July 2009, a policeman whose name has been withheld was driving past Silbury Hill in the early morning when he spotted three figures in a field on the opposite side of the road. The men were dressed in all white coveralls, and the police officer's first instinct was to assume they were forensic officers. All three figures were over 6 foot tall and had visibly blonde hair, and in his observation, these figures seemed to him to be examining the crops. He stopped the car and approached the field. As he got to the edge of the field, he heard a sound that he described as being like static electricity. This crackling noise seemed to be moving through the field, and the crops could be seen to be gently moving in the vicinity of where the perceived noise was travelling. He felt the hair on his arms and the back of his neck rise up. After a moment, he shouted out to the figures, but they ignored him entirely, not even glancing up to acknowledge his presence. Police officers do not like to be ignored, and Julie, the officer, entered the bottom of the field, and this action did invoke a response. The figures began running, and the officer later commented to the investigation team that, quote, "They ran faster than any man I've ever seen. I'm no slouch, but they were moving so fast. I looked away for a second and they were gone. I then got scared. The noise was still around, but I got an uneasy feeling and headed for the car. For the rest of the day, I had a pounding headache I could not shift." Over the brow of the hill, a recently formed crop formation had appeared 1 to 2 days before. It had been talked about in and around the area enough that the officer was aware that it was supposed to be right there, where the being seemed to have then headed, but he could not see it himself from the vantage point of the road, nor upon entering the lower end of the field. As best as I can tell, the formation was discovered and likely made the day prior on July 5th. Graham Hancock lists it on his website among other crop formations from the year 2009. It is from this site that I learned that this is a representation of a Mayan symbol which also resembles what the Aztecs called the feathered serpent, or Quetzalcoatl. The Mayans predicted this great god of theirs would return to Earth after a long absence in the year 2012. The skull with 2 eyes, a nose and teeth can be seen beneath the crescent moon, and 28 large feathers that contain Mayan numbers. Anyway, back to the officer's account. Upon giving chase, the first figure had disappeared over the brow of the hill almost instantly, given its close proximity and speed. The other figures moved very quickly, and the officer likened it to watching people on a video or DVD running whilst on fast forward mode. When the investigators pressed further and asked if he had seen them fully run away or if they had disappeared, the officer conceded he looked away for a second, and when he looked back they were gone. Investigators Andrews and Russell drove the route several times with the officer after the sighting and noted all of the pertinent information. They had to ask if he knew about the crop formation just out of view from the base of the field, to which he confirmed he knew there was a formation somewhere over there, as he had heard it being discussed locally. He went on to add that he knew they'd been in it. He knew they were inspecting the crop. When questioned about how he knew, he responded, "You know what day of the week it is, but no one told you. You haven't seen a calendar. You just know." The investigators tell us they do not believe this man is taken to flights of fancy and sees the world in a very black and white state. In essence, they could find nothing in which to raise any doubts against his credibility. The investigators diligently retraced the steps the officer had taken several times and recorded all of the pertinent timings and positions of each humanoid involved. The timings of his movement and the officer's arrival home were taken into account, and steps and the journey were retraced. The investigators suspect that there is at least 5 minutes of unaccounted for time, though by their own account they have become adept at spotting where a witness may have some missing time, and it was something they proactively look for and have encountered on multiple occasions previously. They note that they raised the prospect of regressive hypnotherapy as a means to help the officer explore and recap that potentially missing time, an offer which was declined. After the experience, the officer and the investigators stayed in touch, and the officer subsequently reported that he was suffering from what he referred to as poltergeist experiences. Several electrical items had malfunctioned in his proximity, and he was getting knocks on the front door to his home. When he answered the door, there would routinely be no one there. By his own account, the officer felt he had, quote, brought something home with him. Occasionally in the days following the incident, he would have short flashes of visions, usually very brief, when walking between one room and another. And in these flashes, he would see in his mind's eye a towering black figure of about 8 feet in height, standing right in front of him. About a week after the incident, the officer contacted the investigators again to say he felt there were parts of the incident that were now coming to mind that he had not been aware of. He came to believe that the beings he saw were identical in a clone-like manner, and also with a shared or possibly hive form of intelligence. He also stated that he believed these beings were not responsible for the nearby crop formation or any other crop formation. He went on to state he shouldn't have seen what he saw. He latterly recalled the knowledge of this being communicated to him at the time. The officer could not be sure of where this information came from, and these concepts and thoughts were outside of his usual frame of reference. The officer's experiences continued, and an unspecified time after the initial event, he witnessed from his home an orange globe in the sky. He was having trouble sleeping, which was unusual for him, so he went outside into his back garden for a cigarette, whereupon he saw in the night sky a large orange-amber globe several hundred yards from him. This globe hovered silently, then started to move from side to side, before shooting off at high speed. The investigators concluded that they were satisfied that the officer did indeed have an experience in the field opposite Silbury Hill that day, but also note that they were unable to fully explore everything, such as why or how the beings were perceived to have moved so rapidly, and to be able to establish what happened during the supposed missing time. They were able to independently verify the officer's movements on the day, and surmised that they felt there was no way the officer had sufficient foreknowledge to be able to create the details in the story that he had provided. Investigator Russell also logs a subsequent event that lends yet more mystery to this case. He was contacted a few months after the investigation by a computer programmer from London who had been at the car park at Silbury Hill a few weeks after the initial encounter. He had parked there to rest briefly after a meeting with a customer. He became aware of something off to the left of his car and felt a strange sensation of a prickly warmth, as if someone were watching him. He turned his head to see a strange-looking tall blonde man with an unusual face who was watching him. He claimed he felt there was something different about him. He was dressed in normal attire, but the programmer repeated his observation that he was not quite right. The next thing this man knew, he was waking up and an hour had passed. He assumed he must have fallen asleep, and the tall blonde man was now gone. I could find no further notes on this subsequent incident. Let's take a look back and summarise the key facts and talking points. On the 6th of July 2009, a police officer had an encounter with three beings in a field near Silbury Hill, Avebury. The beings appeared to be humanoid males, perceived to be over 6 foot tall, with blonde hair, and were dressed in all white overalls. It was the police officer's observation that these beings were examining the crops in the field. As he got out of his car, he could hear a noise that he described to be like static electricity. The source of the noise could not be seen, but it seemed like it was travelling, and the crops in the field seemed to move in correlation with the movement of the sound. He called out to the beings, but they ignored him. So he entered the field, which prompted the beings to run away. They did so at what appeared to be an abnormally fast speed, over the brow of the hill, and in the direction of a crop formation that had been discovered and or formed 1 day prior. The police officer reported physical and mental side effects of the encounter. For the rest of the day he recalled having a headache that he could not shift. He reported poltergeist activity and stated he felt he had brought something home with him, with knocks at the door and electrical equipment malfunctioning. He had flashes of visions of a tall shadow being. Despite not actually witnessing the beings in the crop formation, he has an instinct that he knows they had been in it. He knows they are inspecting the crop. A week after the encounter, he felt he had recovered missing memories that the beings were so identical that they could have been clones, that they had some kind of shared intelligence or hive intelligence. He had a sense that he had witnessed something he was not supposed to. He somehow knows that the beings did not create the crop formations or any other formation. Sometime after the initial event, he may have seen a UFO, as he reported seeing an orange-amber light hovering silently in the sky. Having recreated the officer's movements and retraced his steps a number of times, the investigators suspect that there was a period of missing time of at least 5 minutes. The investigators were unable to debunk the officer's claims and found him to be an entirely reasonable person. They probed his interests and background and do not believe he had any particular leanings towards works of fantasy or an interest in UFOs or the paranormal. A subsequent encounter with a blonde being was reported in a nearby car park a few weeks later. So odd was the encounter that the individual concerned felt compelled to report it. However, even by the account of the man, it may have been just an odd-looking human being, and he fell asleep. He may have been tired, as he stated he felt the need to pull up into the car park for a rest. One of the curious things about this case is deciding how to classify it. We have a crop formation, potential alien beings, a UFO sighting, visions of an ominous, towering shadow person, and poltergeist activity. I have a confession to make in one regard. I have never been too convinced by crop formations, and in one sense the officer's recall that the beings did not create this particular formation seems about right to me. My own theory on most crop formations is that they are man-made by enthusiasts. There has been what might be described as an improvement or an evolution in the quality of crop formations over the years, and I believe that comes from practice and the human desire to learn and improve. I suspect there are a number of groups who find some kind of jolly fun and mischief in wading through fields in the dark and coordinating ever more fanciful formations. That the year of this incident was 2009 and this particular formation was mine and linked to the 2012 Mayan theories was probably deliberate. I know some crop formation enthusiasts claim that there is some unknown technology that flattens and perhaps blows out the stalks in a way that cannot be matched by some boards and some rope. It's a fair point, but in this case I'd posit two counterpoints. Firstly, the supposed or alleged hoaxers may have started out using boards and rope in the 1970s and 80s, but they don't broadcast their identities, and their methods may well have moved on since then. I have no proof of this, but Occam's razor and all that. Secondly, if the theory is that aliens have advanced technology that they use to print messages for humanity, messages that require some form of interpretation and reaching, then why bother putting messages in crops? Why not just make a YouTube video or call me on the phone in my pocket? Why not broadcast something over the radio or on television? Why create a form of communication that is reliant on there being crops? Doesn't seem a very intelligent way of communicating. So, on the whole, I am dubious about the origins of crop formations, but I'm not so close-minded that if real evidence was to present, then I could become convinced. Until then, I think it's more likely to conclude that most formations are of human creation. I say this, and I should note that I will have at least one future episode where we'll look at a particularly interesting and unorthodox set of crop formations, which seem to be completely different and very interesting. But that's for another day. I will say this. The police officer did come to believe or recall some memory that the beings did not create this formation. This not only supports my own assumptions, but it raises an interesting question. Why were these potentially alien beings inspecting the crops and potentially the formation? What was their motive? What was their mission? The beings are described in the classic Nordic Alien style. They are tall and blonde, which fits with other sightings. The Nordic aliens are otherwise thought to be benevolent, and encounters usually include some expression of concern for humanity and the planet. Here, the encounter in the field does seem to be an accident. Somehow, the police officer made sight of these beings when he wasn't supposed to. If we can be open-minded to their presence in the field that day, it seems that this is a case where there was no premeditation in intending to seek out the officer, or to have even been seen at all. And if we have been open-minded this far, let's go a little further and speculate that this opens the possibility that these beings are present on Earth, and they may even be among us, frequently. There is nothing in the account to prove this, but my interpretation and assumption was that the officer surprised them. Perhaps for some reason their usual cloaking technology failed. And what are we to make of the static sound and the moving crops? It evoked an image in my mind that maybe a cloaked UFO was moving overhead. But again, that's a supposition on my behalf. What if they were curious about the crop formation and were suspicious of its origins too? Perhaps I'm wrong. And maybe these crop formations are made by aliens. And in this case, if it wasn't the Nordics that created it, maybe it was they, not us, that the intended recipient of some message. That then might lend to the idea that these messages are between visiting aliens. But again, I wonder why such a bizarre medium would be employed. What is curious though, is if these beings are benevolent, and this was an unintended encounter, benevolence isn't the word I would have associated with the events and effects recorded subsequent to the sighting. The resulting headache might lend us to speculate that some kind of memory wipe was employed, memory loss and missing time being a factor in many alien encounter reports. And what of the poltergeist activity, the electrical malfunctions, the visions of the tall shadow being, and the ominous UFO over his house? It is fair to say that all of these may have logical, scientific and reasonable explanations. It is possible, of course, that as a police officer, some children may have targeted the officer for some rounds of knock and run, an irritating pastime that seems to me to lack any entertainment, but which in my younger years I witnessed kids doing a number of times. It might also be true that the officer's wiring at home may have been faulty, and also too a number of the appliances. Have you ever experienced having multiple appliances malfunction in a short space of time? I believe I have. The headache might have just been that, a simple headache, and the light in the sky might have been a bug or an aeroplane. I leave open too the possibility that some blonde men were trespassing in that field, and when they saw the officer they simply ran away. In the description of the men, much like with Nordic Alien encounters, there is enough similarity that they could be described as human-like. So yes, this incident may have just been a simple case of a police officer chasing free trespassers, with unusual environmental conditions, and a series of explainable events followed that inflate the story's appeal. But I don't believe that. The investigators spent a good amount of time with this man, and found him to be entirely reasonable. I can only imagine how many time wasters and fantasists they must encounter in their line of work, but I generally think that, in time, people can get a good gauge of who's reliable and trustworthy, and who's out for some attention. As a police officer and a professionally trained observer, I think the witness was telling the truth. I think he witnessed something he shouldn't have that day, but the purpose of those supposed aliens being there remains a mystery. There is a lot this case has in common with other alleged encounters, and I think that lends credence to the likelihood of it being true. It also completes the UK Paranormal Files trilogy of free alien encounter videos, where the central figure is a trained police officer. Each of these three cases were very different. There seems to be different alien races in each. What this case lacked, that the other two provided, was some physical evidence. It is also notable that in this case the opportunity to explore hypnotic regression was not availed of. We're left to wonder what other details we may have learned. In each case, the police officers did not just shrug off the incidents. They were all profoundly affected by their encounters and engaged with researchers to properly document the case. Given their line of work, they may have felt compelled to put some kind of investigation in place, and luckily for us, they did. I do wonder to what extent alien visitations are taking place, and the untold number of encounters which have lacked some form of rigorous independent investigation. I wonder too if someday there will be more credence given to such encounters, and some form of proper funding for research and investigation can be established. Unfortunately, most cases get instantly dismissed. Skeptics argue for explainable influences and psychological causes. And of course, we all know what the official lines are from the more powerful governments of the world. But those who have had their experiences are never the same. For many, there is a great trauma. They know there's something going on that we only ever get glimpses of. They know there's an untold truth that humankind has yet to accept. My instinct, as I have already shared, is that the police officer did indeed have an encounter, and probably with some kind of alien Nordics. But the absence of physical evidence does make it more difficult to rate as high as I would like, but I do need to strive for some consistency. So, on the UK Paranormal Files credibility meter, I'm scoring the Silbury Hill alien encounter as interesting. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this rating, and if not, how you would have scored it. If you have enjoyed this video, please click the like button. It would be greatly appreciated if you would give it a share on your favoured social media. And if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button and click the bell icon to receive notifications when new videos go up. As always, thanks very much for watching.